Good morning. My name is Jason Malenpak, and I am the Director of Risk Management for Mercedes Construction Company. Today, I'm partnering with IUP's Pennsylvania OSHA Consultation Office to talk to you with regard to the impact of mental health and the safety of our employees. So some of the objectives that we're going to go over today with regard to this webinar is the role of the safety professional in our current status, what actually is a culture and how we define a culture and whether it's being effective or not within our fight to prevent accidents. We're going to talk about the breakdown of behaviors, why that is important in the reduction of accidents. And one of the biggest topics we're going to talk about today is the mental wellness of our employees and how that affects loss, all aspects of our construction sites. And then we're going to talk a little bit about our story or our own personal trials and tribulations that can make our work-life balance more effective. So just to start off, again, my name is Jason Malenpak. Some of the things that I enjoy, some of the passions that I entertain. Of course, I'm a family man. I have 4 children. I like to coach baseball. Coaching baseball for several years now. Other things that I enjoy are getting together with my friends, do a little bit of golfing, hiking with my son across the country, and then always having a beer on the beach is probably one of the most enjoyable aspects because it's so relaxing to me. I've been working for Mercedes for 26 years. I've worked my way up through the corporate ladder to this current position. Through those 26 years, I've learned to negotiate and manage a variety of different personalities, which has put me in this position. And I cannot be more thankful to Mercedes for the opportunities that they have given me. So let's start with a quick question. And this is a question I ask a lot of my safety professional role models, is that, am I making a difference? A lot of times I'll actually apologize to some of our work crews because I don't necessarily feel that over the last few years, I've been making a difference with regard to my role. My role within the company is basically to prevent as many accidents and provide education and opportunity for our employees to work as safely as possible. Our job is not an 8-hour job. It is a 24-hour a day, 7-day-a-week profession where our role is to basically see the unseen. What I mean by that is it's pretty easy for someone to come onto a job site and see a hazard that is relatively apparent. What is not easy to see is something that may not be as transparent as a normal person would take for granted. What we try to avoid is kind of safety, where we kind of put an emphasis on safety, where we think about checking the box is the right thing to do. What we do want to think about is thinking outside the box to make sure that we are providing the most safe work environment for our employees. This presentation is something that is definitely outside the box, and I think that you're going to enjoy. So let's talk about some numbers. Numbers don't lie. I mean, for the last few years, statistically, every day, 14 occupational fatalities occur across the United States, with 5,190 workers passing away in 2021, which is up 8.9%. We have over 70 million lost work days, 340 million occupational injuries per year, 718 homicides, 15.5 suicides, $49 billion in direct U.S. workers' compensation costs. So the question I have for the safety professional out there, everyone involved in industry, construction, maritime, whatever your specialty is why is this continuing to happen? Why is this continuing to happen when we take pride in the technology and the training, the PPE, the equipment we supply our employees, continuous support from top management, the learning, the knowledge, but yet we still have these accidents continuing to happen? So we often look at a culture. And what is the culture of an organization? Culture of an organization is basically the heartbeat of how shared values are traded down from generation to generation. And typically, culture is made up of 5 values. And of course, the number one is going to be sharing those values with the employees throughout the top of the organization to the newest employee. It's a top-down approach. But what I have found out within our organization is that in combination with top-down, we also like to use a bottom-up approach where we include the newest employees and a lot of the things that we do with regard to training and decision-making on job sites. We pride ourselves on continuous learning. And again, thinking outside the box and being creative, not doing your standard job safety analysis, your AHAs, your toolbox talks, thinking about getting people involved and being a part of the solution. We hold all of our employees accountable. Without accountability, you kind of lose your structure. So accountability is one of the top responsibilities within our organization. We make sure that each employee is held to a high standard. We consider all of our employees professional. They're all trades employees. We do have a development part of our organization. Again, treating everyone as a professional and holding them to the highest standard. We constantly give support and try to make sure that all of our employees understand that we are there for them. But one of the things within a culture that I thought was missing on these top 5 was that a culture needs to evolve. And we hand on ideas and generation to generation. We need to make sure that our culture is evolving and changing with the times. Generationally speaking, we need as managers to change with what is occurring through different generations and the needs and wants of those generations. So simple text message back in 2018 changed our direction at Musitis Construction Company. My son sent me a TED talk, and it was with regard to the Golden Gate Bridge. And what we realized when we shared that TED talk with a number of our employees at a training session is that our employees needed help. Not necessarily mental health, but just an opportunity to express their emotion. We realized that a number of those employees did not know how to or who to talk to if they were having any kind of mental, emotional, anxiety, stress, depression issues. So we did some research and we come to find out that there's 12 billion workdays lost to anxiety and depression. 35% increase in the United States in antidepressant prescription medications. And unfortunately, construction, the industry that I'm in, the suicide rate is 2 times higher than any other occupation within the United States. It's very personal to Musitis because through the 26 years with Musitis Construction Company, we have lost 7 employees to suicide, and it's 7 to. So let's talk a little bit about what is mental health and how it is attributable to safety. And you see the definition in front of you. It's on the PowerPoint, and it's more or less a common sense statement. But basically, it focuses on the concept of mental wellness and a proactive strategy in dealing with life. We first looked at this option to implement it within our safety program. We had a discussion and we understood the fact that this was a rabbit hole because of all of the things that make up strong and productive mental health. Now, the problem that you run into is that you have to be able to provide the resources for productive mental health program. So we started looking at behaviors and the behaviors of all of our employees, top management, all the way down again to our newest employee. And we thought to ourselves, how are we going to identify these behaviors and change them? The changing of a behavior is probably one of the hardest things to do within an organization and even personally. So we said to ourselves, well, the typical person has 40,000 thoughts a day. And how many of those thoughts are negative? And we did research and we come to find out that there's 80% of person's thoughts throughout the day are negative, with 95% of them being repeat. And again, through research, we understand that negativity bias is a defense mechanism that has been established through time. It provided us opportunity to protect ourselves when our ancestors established our cultures, and it's something that is ingrained into us. So to change negativity bias, I will give you a couple ideas here in the next slide. But we have to be realistic and understand that that's why we see a number of companies, the media, TV, radio, video games, everything that we see seems to be negative. And there's a reason behind that, because that stimulates more emotion out of us rather than something that's positive. So hence the reason you see a number of these entities, such as TV, radio, movies, having a negative connotation. We also looked at a study, 2008, smartphone was released. In 2021, sale of the smartphone started to plateau. 2008, there were 317 million people in the United States with a smartphone. Typically, there's roughly around 320 to 321 million people in the United States currently. So the majority of people had smartphones in 2021, but what we realized is we did a little correlation from people from the age, girls and boys, from the age of 12 to 34, that what paralleled was the sale of smartphones and the suicide attempts and or suicides of people of that age. There was a correlation, and we wanted to understand, well, why is there a correlation between the sale of smartphones and the number of suicides? And what we've come up with, and we hypothesize, is that it's a lack of ability to communicate. People are not being able to share their emotions, and rather they rely more on their cell phone as an escape rather than having a conversation with the ones that care about them and love them. Sorry about that delay, a little technical difficulty, but we'll continue here. So I referenced the fact that how we're going to defeat negativity bias. The biggest way you defeat negativity bias is you're aware of your emotions. And a perfect example of that is when you're driving to work and someone cuts you off, first emotion you're going to have is anger. Defeating negativity bias is being able to step back from that anger and understand that maybe that person is going through something in their personal life that caused them to create that hazard in front of you, or that poor act. It's very difficult to do. And again, I first stated in the presentation, change is probably the hardest thing for us as individuals to take on. So to be able to flip bad instance into a good one is not very easy to do. It takes practice, and that is one step in regards to how you try to defeat negativity bias. But you're not going to get anywhere unless you care about the change. You have to have a vested interest in it. Surrounding yourself with positive people is probably one of the most progressive ways to do it. Ridding yourself of the anxiety and the stresses in your life, deleting them from your life is also a major tool to defeat negativity bias. And as you saw in one of the slides earlier, I am a baseball coach. One of the things that I share with my players and with my children is that I say to them that, you show me your friends and I will show you your future. Surround yourself with people who care about you. The other aspect of defeating negativity bias is you need to be patient. Try to think about your thoughts before responding. Take a deep breath. It's like the 10-second rule. Take a deep breath and do not respond in a negative fashion. Think about how you're responding. You see the quote there, I buried the old Jason and I do not plan on visiting his grave. 52 years old, and I've taken it upon myself the last 2 years to make change in my own personal life, to make my life better, to understand that the way I do see things will directly impact people that I'm around the most. So a little bit about the safety side of this. On the behavior-based safety side, we look at occurrences, whether they're negative or positive, and we document them to help prevent or predict the next loss. And behavior-based safety has been around for a few years and has been a very good tool with regards to recognizing those behaviors. And NIOSH has also come out with a total worker health concept where if we eliminate the hazards on a job site, that an employee's health and stress will be eliminated. And again, another positive tool. But what we've looked at from our perspective is that behaviors are created by an attitude. And whether that attitude is positive or negative will directly impact whether the behavior is positive or negative. But what we did is we took a little deeper dive. We said, what creates an attitude? And we understand that emotion creates an attitude. And emotions are generated from an external and internal instance. Again, like we said, if you're driving down the road, someone cuts you off, your internal instance is going to tell you to be upset. That is where we are with regard to the focus of our current safety culture. We are focusing on those emotions because we believe that those emotions are directly proportionate to our losses. Because if we can control emotions that happen outside of the job site or on the job site, we'll be able to help eliminate accidents to the best of our ability. So some of the barriers that we've come across in trying to eliminate these, try to mitigate negative emotions, is a stigma. And the stigma is that a lot of people necessarily don't like to talk about their emotions. But through education, we try to let our employees know that we truly care about their well-being. And we need to make sure that they are aware, because the things that they're teaching them is that we'll be able to utilize the information not only on a professional level, but also be able to utilize the information on a personal level. We make them aware of some of the things that deal with mental wellness, and the big one is ignoring the symptoms. Often, when we come across someone and say, "Hey, how are you doing?" the response is good. Sometimes the response is good with a poor demeanor. How do we let that go? Do we push? Do we try to find out what's going on? Within our families, I know that often it's difficult to have some of those conversations. But some of the symptoms that you need to be aware of when people are struggling with a little bit of mental wellness is their need to be alone, their loss of appetite, use of drugs or alcohol. They're quick to anger, and often their appearance seems to falter, not really dressing like they used to or taking care of themselves. But the big question that people often ask me is, Jason, well, if I talk about suicide, is it going to make them think about suicide? And that is not the case. Talking about suicide to someone who may have considered suicide will actually be a reprieve for them, because then they know that you're caring about them and that you're thinking about them. Another way to break the stigma is action. So when and if you come across an employee who may be battling mental wellness issues, mental health issues, you have to have an action plan. And two of them that I have listed here is employee assistance program, where a lot of medical providers provide options for employees to utilize mental health assistance programs. We at Mesites use a mentorship program coupled with a helpline. It's called U-Turn, and that has been very resourceful for our employees, because we extend that mentorship program to not only our employees but to their families as well, to let them know that we care a lot about not only when they're at work, but when they're not at work. We continually support this program through lunches, flyers, through continuous educational opportunities, through paycheck notifications, even text messages, just to keep employees knowledgeable about what mental health consists of and the barriers that we see on a daily basis. I know from my personal experience that I did everything wrong when it came to mental health, in my particular experience, because when I came across an individual who was battling mental health, my first response to them was, well, how do you have a mental health issue when you're a good looking person, you're smart, everyone likes you, you're successful? And I didn't realize, but going through the process, that was more of like salt in the wound. And that what I should have done is just said, hey, I'm here for you, let's talk about it, and then created a plan from there. And when I went through that process, one of the things that we trained on was finding or identifying baskets. And often in our life, our baskets become limited as we go through our professional career. We don't get to do the things that we love as much and as often, and those baskets start to disappear. And I found out that once those baskets begin to disappear, then we start losing our value as a person. We need to make sure that we continue to have as many baskets in our life as we can, because those baskets create importance and value. Mental health and wellness is broken up to 6 different kinds of baskets. Of course, the first one is physical. Being in good shape and exercising, watching your diet. That for any research that you do, that'll definitely explain how important that is. Exercise, diet, and being in good shape is basically the foundation to having a good mental health posture. Of course, the mental part of it is a state of mind and an ability to cope. There are people who don't have that ability to cope, and they do need to seek guidance. And that guidance is more than just talking to someone. That guidance can consist of talking to someone. It can consist of medications. It can consist of workshops. It can consist of more baskets. So there's a lot to the mental health aspect of it. The emotional part of it is being able to express their feelings maturely. And again, not everybody can express their feelings in a clear manner. As individuals, we need to understand that the way we may perceive something is not necessarily the way others perceive it. So we have to be aware of that emotional aspect of it. Having a strong spiritual mental basket is being able to find your purpose and your meaning. And that's not a kumbaya kind of topic. It's just saying that, hey, each one of us has a value to bring to this world. And the great thing about it is being creative enough to try and find that spiritual value, that meaning, what you can bring to this world. And it can be the most simplest thing, but each and every one of us have that value. Social side of it is being able to enjoy relationships. And again, not everybody enjoys being in personal arenas or being around people. They do like their independence. So, we have to take that into consideration as well. But being social and being able to enjoy relationships definitely provide a good, positive mental basket. And lastly is our environment. We take things often for granted, and what we fail to recognize is little things. The appreciation for our surroundings is extremely important, and not taking every day for granted. So often companies come up to me and say, hey, Jason, why did Misitis change? And there's 3 reasons behind why Misitis changed. And the number one reason, and the most important reason for all of these organizations to listen to this webinar, is that more than 90% of all water losses, whether it was a general liability claim, an auto claim, a workers' compensation claim, was due to a poor behavior because that employee's head was not in the game. We took the time to sit down and talk to these individuals and find out that, hey, they were thinking of a task that they had to do in an hour or 15 minutes beforehand. They thought about fight that they got in with their spouse before or a friend. They were going through some other emotional losses, things that distracted them from what they were doing at hand. And we needed to make sure that we needed to train our employees on how to recognize that if your head is not in the game, we need to communicate that. Studies show that even with depression, which 1 out of 5 Americans have, even with depression, you can see from this PET scan image that being able to think cognitively is almost impossible. Depression reduces the ability to think cognitively. Same thing with anxiety, same thing with anger. Whenever one of those emotions consumes you, your ability to think straight is very difficult to do. The second reason, and as we go through these cultural changes and we try to, generational changes, employee retention has been extremely difficult. Well, what's more important than standing up behind the values that we have painted on our walls and in our employee handbooks? Being a part of something bigger than just a company. Being valued and appreciated. Understanding that you are part of a team and we all have a common goal. And again, like I said, we need to adapt to the generational needs. Every generation has different wants and different needs. And when they feel as though they're engaged and they're part of something, then retention is positive. Lastly, because it's the right thing to do. Again, we're supporting our values and our resources, and it's a commitment to our employees and their families, work and at home. And what we focus on is not so much a work-life balance, but a life-work balance, because we believe that if you have a solid life structure and you have a solid mental wellness approach, that your work balance will be positive as well. Our objective, always more good days than bad. So what we do is we ask ourselves, and everyone associated with this webinar and participating in this webinar, and I want you to ask yourself, when you deal with depression and anxiety, grief and anger, how do you deal with it? Do you know some of the ways to help alleviate those mental wellness concerns? Do you know how to answer questions if someone comes up to you and says, hey, I don't necessarily feel as though I want to do this anymore? Do you have the ability to communicate with your family and your friends and your children, co-workers, about how to deal with mental health concerns? Education is invaluable. You educate yourself with something that is so apparent in today's society. It makes you such a value to someone who needs help. So, what is your why? One of the photos that you saw earlier with my son and myself hiking through mountains. One day he asked me, Dad, what is your why? And it took me back because I had to try to understand what was my reason. I've been doing safety and health for 26 years. I will be honest that when my son asked me my why, that put me in a new direction, because ultimately, my passion is to change the world for the better. It begins with our employees and my family and friends, but this passion I want to share with as many people as possible, because I think that this direction with regard to health and safety will help eliminate and minimize and reduce those numbers that we saw earlier. Part of my why was creating more instances in my life book. This is, again, not an emotional webinar. This is just something that everyone needs to step back and take a look and say, hey, what is my why? What instances do I want to put in my book? What are my interests? What baskets do I want to create that will make my life better so that people around me benefit from it? And lastly, and ultimately, defeat complacency. All we go through the safety programs, and often at times, we check the boxes and we think that we're necessarily creating a safer work environment. That's not the case. When we defeat complacency, whether it's at work, personal relationships, physical parents, social parents, we become a better person. And it's very difficult. Again, when we talked about change is not easy. And being able to create more baskets and being complacent is going to give us more instances and more things to reflect on when it comes time to sit back and enjoy that lemonade on your porch. Ask yourself what your purpose is and what you bring to life. Too often, we measure ourselves against others and what they have. And we ask ourselves questions as to why do they have the nice house, or why do they drive the nice car, why do they have that particular position? And instead of saying that, ultimately look at yourself and say, hey, it's not what life gives me, but rather what I give life. And if you believe in that concept, be able to find your value, be able to make changes in your organization. And these are the things that will help us as safety professionals and owners of companies, employees of companies, make it a change with regard to overall employee safety and life-work balance. So to that, I'd like to say thank you for everyone who participated in this webinar. That's just a simple picture of me and my best friend sitting on a rock, enjoying a nice little hike. And that was a basket that I created because I've never hiked before, but I've taken that up in regards to trying to change my perspective. But to that notion, if anyone has any questions, you'll be able to add them into the chat box. I will answer all questions. If you would like to speak to me personally, if you would like for me to come out to your organization and talk to you about how we're incorporating our mental health and life-work balance, I would love to do that. You can reach me at jason.m@mosites, MOSITES.com, or you can contact the IUP OSHA consultation, and they'll provide you my information. But again, thank you very much for everyone's time, and I look forward to seeing you soon.